The highlight of Project Hail Mary isn't the overarching plot, Ryan Gosling, interstellar travel, or even the resolution of a global catastrophe solved by a somewhat ostracized schoolteacher. Instead, it's the friendly alien, Rocky. That's not their name per se, but humans can't perceive the Eridian language, so Grace gives them that name due to their rock-like appearance. What stands out when we meet Rocky is just how anatomically different they are from humans. Writer Andy Weir has crafted a masterful explanation of fictional geography and biology to not only make Rocky the alien possible, but also to explain how such a species would come to be. With that, let's dive into the breakdown of Rocky's anatomy, how and why they evolved the way they did, and how this differs from the human body. Also, we're going to be sticking to the film more than the novel for visual references. Who exactly is Rocky, really? Rocky is an engineer from Arid, a planet that was in the same predicament as Earth since their sun was dying, thanks to the astrophage. Naturally, Arid sent out an interstellar task force to pinpoint the cause and find a solution for the sustenance of their planet, and Rocky happened to be one of 24 crew members sent on that mission, taking him far away from home. Unfortunately, the other 23 died, and just like Ryland Grace, Rocky was the sole survivor, stranded light years away in the universe, all alone. So when the two survivors met each other, they became partners, not in crime, but in being the saviors of their respective planets. As an Eridian, Rocky's physiology is vastly different from that of Grace. He looks something like a spider or a crab, with his main body being a rocky carapace. 5 limbs sprout from his body, and he has spider-like motion. However, there is a distinction between the hands and the legs for the limbs, much like that of a crab. This is why we see Rocky attempting a thumbs up to mimic Grace out of camaraderie. Except it looks more like a thumbs down due to Rocky's very unusual anatomy, as he has 3 stubby rock fingers that are triangular. None of those digits seem to function as a thumb, which is fascinating because that's what puts humans on top of the food chain, opposable thumbs. They're why we can hold things and build tools and use weapons. But Eridians seem to have progressed without needing this particular evolutionary advantage. Of course, they've got other stuff going on for them that humans don't. Rocky doesn't have eyes, or even a face for that matter, and as such cannot really see the way humans do. Obviously, he can perceive his surroundings, thanks to Eridians possessing superior hearing, which allows for echolocation. In many ways, Rocky is kinda like a kid. Or at least a kid from a spacefaring advanced civilization. He's strangely adorable in the movie, especially since he's basically a spider made out of rock. Rocky is about the size of a big dog, but similar to humans, Eridians vary in size, albeit not to a large extent. Some are as big as Rocky, but many are also smaller. Their rock-like exterior is smooth with a dark brownish hue. Rocky's carapace, in particular, is smooth, hard, and has a pentagonal look. His surface also has carvings in what seems to be a green gel alongside other embedded stone-like substances. Now that sight is out of the question, let's address language and communication, as any intelligent species must communicate. Eridians don't speak, and instead generate musical tones and chords, almost like an esoteric dolphin on hallucinogens. Sounds are essential to Eridians for both communication and gestures. For example, Eridians don't say goodbye in their unique speech. Instead, they scratch the rock on their forearms, and because they can't see, it's a given that Eridians can determine which part of the body is being scratched and the matter it wants to imply without needing to look at it, owing to their superior hearing abilities. Being an extraterrestrial race, at least from the perspective of Grace and humanity, Eridians are extremely different from humans. And this comes with a language barrier so intense, a regular translator wouldn't be able to help. The barrier is comparable to how a 50-year-old Englishman might feel if they had to learn Mandarin from scratch at their age, but this is a science fiction story, and the solution comes in the form of Grace creating a software that instantly translates what Rocky is telling him into English. This allows the two to have a seemingly smooth back and forth. Rocky has a few language tics, however, such as saying amaze, amaze, amaze when something is great. Of course, they're saying it in their language, and the software is translating it into the closest possible English. Either way, it's proof that, like humans, Eridians too have their own way of saying things, their separate inflections and verbal tics. Similar to Grace, Rocky had been stranded for a hot minute. Isolated and far from home, he wanted to connect with Grace from the get-go and did so by sending blips to the Hail Mary, allowing Grace to learn that a separate life form from a different planet was attempting to communicate with him. Once the hangout was scheduled, Rocky created a tunnel made of xenonite to connect their ship to the Hail Mary, allowing them to meet Grace for the first time. What surprised Grace the most, however, was Rocky's access to a solid xenon substance, which he named xenonite, since on Earth, xenon is a noble gas and it's only available in trace amounts. Arid seems to have hordes of it, and it's a very interesting material because it has unlimited tensile strength and comes in a range of colors and textures. The tunnel was tan and had a rugged structure similar to that of the inside of a crystal, such as an amethyst. The overall look was modeled, but of course, because Eridians don't possess sight, we doubt Rocky cared about the aesthetics of the tunnel. As it stood, the filmmakers wanted the tunnel to look like Grace was walking into a well, which is where the hexagonal structures of the well contribute. The xenonite can also be transparent, as seen with the hexagonal structure that encased Rocky for the latter's own safety, as they could not expose themselves to the atmosphere or lack thereof of outer space. What exactly is Rocky's species, the Eridians, and how are they different from humans? The vast differences between humans and Eridians are due to Arid, Rocky's home planet, being completely different from Earth, and it's very important to Rocky's anatomy and the story of Project Hail Mary in general, since Andy Weir developed the biosphere of Arid before Rocky himself. Arid is extremely close to its central star, basically their version of the Sun. This suggests that the gravity on Arid is far stronger than that of Earth. It has a strong magnetic field, 25 times more than that of Earth, and an atmosphere that's mostly ammonia, unlike Earth's nitrogen-oxygen-dominant air. This causes Arid's atmosphere to be so dense that it blocks most incoming light. The presence of multiple microbes and life across these atmospheric layers also contributes to Arid's lack of sunlight. Presumably, this is why Eridians didn't evolve with sight, and instead rely on echolocation, which is made possible by their fantastic sonar. It's almost like an entire species of Stevie Wonders floating around out there in space. Due to the atmospheric block, Eridians are also unaware of what radiation is. As it stands, Rocky's crew members died because of radiation while in outer space, oblivious to the details of the matter until Grace revealed it to Rocky. Either way, the planet is hot, which means Eridians need a lot of heat to survive. Without light, Eridians also don't perceive night and day like humans, but they do have an intrinsic understanding of it, so much so that their bodily functions operate by it. Similar to how humans are the apex predators of Earth, Rocky's species are the apex predators of Arid. Unfortunately for Grace, who has been arguing for the existence of life without the requirement for water, Eridians are water-based as well, although not to the same extent as humans. Due to their steam-powered muscle movement, Eridians rely on internal water to act as a coolant. The boiling point of water on Arid is also far higher than that of Earth. For starters, it's closer to its central star than Mercury is to Earth. Weir once spoke about this in an interview, so we're just going to quote what he said there. What he said was, well, to have liquid water that's really hot, you have to have really high atmospheric pressure, because the higher the pressure, the higher the boiling point of water. So, okay, they're gonna have a big thick atmosphere. He later added, I decided the atmosphere is made almost entirely of ammonia. That means there's no free oxygen in the atmosphere, which we rely on, right? So I figure the inside of their body is like a biosphere. They have plant-like cells and animal-like cells that keep in balance. They go back and forth, and all they really need to do is add energy to the system via food. Eridians only have about 1 kilogram of actual biological matter. The rest of it is all just stuff that those little worker cells built. So an Eridian is kind of like a beehive that can move. The vast majority of it is inorganic matter. It's just a container for this biosphere that exists on the inside. The biggest difference between Eridians and humans is in how the two species eat. Eridians have an opening below them where they shove their food, but the whole process is kind of crazy because that's also how they poop, but obviously in reverse. What I mean is that they open the hole, drop their matter, and then shove their extraterrestrial food material inside. Grace is visibly grossed out by this, and rightfully so. Eridians are very ashamed of the act because, as you can tell, their very peculiar method of eating puts them in a very vulnerable position, which is kind of the same reason your dog sits outside the bathroom when you're in it, because they think you're very vulnerable and might be attacked. This begs the question, however, what does Rocky eat? Well, the answer is raw minerals and rocky materials. Nothing humans can eat, as it would be toxic to us, and this is directly tied to the biosphere of Arid. Heavy metals are ever present on this planet, and as such, its life forms have to ingest metals for vital nutrients. Overall, their bodies are made of inorganic materials. Unlike humans, we're mostly organic, barring the trace amounts of iron, magnesium, or any kind of micronutrient. The key word here being micro. Iridians do have worker cells that maintain their bodily functions, but they are mostly inorganic with a metallic skeletal structure. The joints operate as hinges, and these hinges move with help from the aforementioned steam generative abilities. They can be compared to a ship, where their inorganic vessel is run by a smaller crew, which refers to the worker cells. This is a stark difference from the living cell-dominated soft-bodied humans. Overall, Iridians have very dense bodies that have adapted to a high-gravity environment. Intriguingly, Iridians can consume human food, they just can't live off of it. Meanwhile, humans will die if they try to consume Iridian food. Iridians also don't live off their environment the same way that humans do, in the sense that while humans breathe the oxygen in their atmosphere for survival, Iridians don't do the same with ammonia. Instead, their energy and life force is self-contained and a result of food consumption only. Air inhalation for Iridians serves the purpose of regulating their extremely high heat temperatures. Speaking of heat, Iridian blood is primarily liquid mercury mixed with smaller amounts of zinc, sodium, tin, copper, aluminum, indium, potassium, plus a little bit of silver and gold in trace amounts. These materials are needed as the worker cells collect them and use them at the needed sites. The mercury is obviously silver in color, which is why when Rocky is seen bleeding after leaving his small habitat to save Grace, a silver substance leaks out of him. Because Iridians evolved in a high-heat environment, they cannot survive outside of it. This means that a normal temperature for a human is freezing for an Iridian. Grace even had to place heat lamps for Rocky when the latter was terribly injured. One major difference between humans and Iridians is the latter's magnetoreception ability, which allows Iridians to sense magnetic fields. This is an ability that some animals on Earth have, but which evolved into existence on Arid due to its strong magnetic field, courtesy of its proximity to their sun. This allows Iridians to intrinsically be aware of where north, south, east, and west are, at least while they're on Arid, which is a great asset for a life form that doesn't rely on sight. However, the movie doesn't really explore this. Instead, we see Rocky's ability for quick calculations and an eidetic memory, presumably due to their crystalline brains working as a hard drive. This makes Iridians fantastic with calculations and data, making them amazing engineers. They remember complex calculations and don't have to work them out every single time like humans. And with greater engineering abilities came Rocky's higher reserves of liquid astrophage, allowing him to spare 2 million kilograms for Grace, for whom this would have otherwise been a suicide mission. Iridians can also perfectly recall sound. On the topic of sound, however, let's discuss the mechanics behind their unique musical language that's far removed from the word-centric human communication. Iridians are able to communicate via sound thanks to the gas bladder sets inside their body. Air is pushed from one bladder to the next via a fine aperture, which for an Iridian is a natural biological process. The back and forth of their air helps generate the sound, and they possess 5 such vocal systems which work together to produce 5 separate sounds, hence the chord-like effect. In musical language, humans speak in the lead melody while Iridians speak in chords, and their possession of 5 vocal systems is in line with their possession of 5 limbs. Their affinity for aural finesse allows them to possess perfect pitch, which is a rare ability among humans, to the point that Charlie Puth can't get through a single interview without having to demonstrate it. However, this is a normal thing for Iridians. They can solve equations and create a boat at the same time thanks to their omnidirectional ability, but they suck with focusing too much on a single thing. They find it boring. It's like intrinsic alien ADHD. On the other hand, humans cannot multitask the way Iridians can, but we have better focus. We also possess better spatial memory since we have a face and can make sense of directions. The Iridians' lack of opposable thumbs also makes their handiness less refined than that of humans. Basically, it's going to be tough to find an Iridian who's better at baseball than a human. While there are differences in Iridian languages, much like human languages, their speech is much more dense with information. It's kind of like Japanese kanji, but spoken out loud and amped up on steroids. Rocky's odd body shape. We've briefly gone over Rocky's body shape, but let's get into the details. The thorax of Rocky's rock-like body is made out of xenonite. Roughly pentagonal in structure, 5 limbs that can shed itself and regrow sprout out of this thorax. Overall, Rocky stands at approximately 4 feet, and he usually stands on 3 out of 5 limbs, while the remaining 2 operate as its kinda sort of hands. All 5 limbs are identical, and the trifurcated claw can operate as both foot and palm. They can also switch the limbs and their operation from its leg-like function to its arm-like function, depending on whatever's convenient. These limbs are joined to the thorax like a ball and socket joint, movement, giving it a much higher range of motion than the human limb, where the joint operates more like a hinge. But Eridians do have hinge-like joints as well, approximately halfway below the ball and socket joints, to operate like the knees and elbows. Metal atoms form the bones of the Eridian body. Unlike humans, however, they don't have a dominant hand and are instead pentadextrous. In contrast, a human being ambidextrous is a rare event. Access to 5 limbs operating with equal ease and skill allows Eridians to be incredibly sure-footed in motion and adds to their engineering abilities as they're able to quickly manufacture and assemble things. Plus, they do it at record speed, explaining how Rocky was able to create a sophisticated tunnel between his ship and the Hail Mary in a very short period of time. The primary reason behind this highly effective adaptation is Arid's high gravity, which is 2 times higher than that of Earth. Because Eridians do not possess a face, they don't possess the concept of facing any direction. As such, there's no such thing as front or back, and they can travel in any direction they wish. They don't even possess concepts or symbols or words for facing left, right, north, south, or whatever as they pivot point to move. This is known as being radially symmetrical. Overall, Rocky is more like a deep-sea creature than a Terran, owing to Arid's terrestrial ecosystem being kinda like the earthy ocean floor, where no light penetrates and the pressure is super high, while the creatures living there lack sight. So Eridians operate like a cross between a crab and a starfish, with crabs being the inspiration behind Rocky's hard exoskeleton and starfishes being the inspiration behind the alien's radial symmetry. What's going on inside that rock shell? Muscular system. Now that we're done talking about the harder exoskeleton, let's go through what's beneath the surface. Eridians have 2 distinct types of muscle. One is the skeletal muscle and the other is the micromuscle. The skeletal muscles are sponge-like and contain thousands of fully expandable vehicles which help perform the macroscopic muscular movements. They're somewhat cylindrical in nature and are surrounded by ACS and HCS capillaries. The ACS are responsible for constricting the flow of their blood or the liquid mercury, while the HCS capillaries increase the flow. Unfortunately for Grace, Eridians are water-based life forms like all the other life we're aware of, although they're not as reliant on water as humans. However, without it, their muscular movements become impossible as their vesicles hold a small amount of liquid water which turns into a gaseous state thanks to the high heat produced by the HCS vessels, increasing the blood flow. This gaseous state of hundreds and thousands of vehicles creates a steam engine-like phenomenon, with the outer sheath of the muscles being like a piston in function, allowing for movement. When this process is reversed, i.e. when the HCS vessels put a stop to the blood flow while the ACS vessels constrict, the steam returns to its liquid state, reducing the body temperature of the Eridian. However, even this reduced body temperature is 210 degrees Celsius, which is almost twice that of the earthly boiling point for water. On Arid, however, the boiling point is 230.2 degrees Celsius, which means the HCS must heat up the water by at least 20 degrees to facilitate muscle movement. Now, coming to the micromuscles, the junction points of the ACS and the HCS have valves and flaps to control the flow. These smaller valves and flaps are powered by the Eridian's crystalline micromuscles. Even the blood vessel wall experiences a chemical change to conduct this electricity, resulting in a small but major deformation of the crystalline micromuscles, allowing it to curl a flap from one branch to the next. Eridians have evolved to possess this ability as their worker cells cannot survive inside the HCS blood vessels. The entire system is quite sophisticated and geared towards conserving energy, which is why the water in the vesicles are 210 degrees at base and below the boiling point, since maintaining the steam-powered state requires more energy. Eridians can also instinctively have multiple parts of their muscles functional while others remain at base status. Once the water heats up and crosses the threshold for the boiling point of water on Arid, it acts as a defense against pathogens and sterilizes incoming food, carrying out the function of white blood cells in a way. I mean, you must be aware of how a lot of pathogens don't survive at higher temperatures, which is exactly why colder weather and uncooked food can get you sick. Other than fighting external pathogens, the heat-based system regulates an Eridian's metabolism, and water happens to be a compound that not only has fantastic capacity for high heat, but also helps regulate the overall body temperature. Brain and nervous system. Now, coming to Rocky's crystalline brain, the impulses generated at the hindbrain are made of light. The refraction of said light does the job that neurons do for us, and they reinforce, block, and redirect the flow of light. Tendrils of crystals spread from the brain to the body to conduct the light and convey nerve impulses, similar to how humans have a nervous system. But Eridians don't have a separate head like us. This is all just body, with the brain being located at the center of the thorax inside what is referred to as the colony. This is home to the worker cells since the brain needs constant care. This is one of the reasons why, when an Eridian sleeps, they enter a near comatose state since the worker cells are confirmed to be taking care of the brain alone. And unlike the human brain, the Eridian brain itself is not made of cells. Their brain can't even operate without the external help provided by the worker cells, as they make changes here and there to aid and redirect the refraction of light as they add or remove elements to and from the crystal. Unlike humans, the Eridian brain does not have a barrier between blood and brain. There's no blood vessels to segregate the two. Overall, the Eridian brain function and anatomy allows them to be fantastic multitaskers, much more so than humans. The brain is responsible for each Eridian having its own personality. Aside from that, they operate like a beehive that can move on its own, with the worker cells being the bees. You could say that the brain is kind of like the queen bee, but a lot better. Circulatory system. Since we know what Eridian blood is composed of and how the blood vessels operate, let's talk about the circulatory system. Eridians actually have two bloodstreams, both unconnected, both at different temperatures. One remains in the liquid state and is run through heat radiators to maintain the temperature of the carapace of the Eridian. This is the ACS, or the ambient circulatory system, which constricts blood flow. They contain varying types of sodium silicate created by the worker cells. The vessels can branch out into thousands of capillaries that eventually reconnect into a larger vessel. While the larger vessels are rigid, the capillaries are flexible. The HCS, or the hot circulatory system, keeps its liquid far above the boiling point of water. It's over 300 degrees Celsius in there and is much smaller in volume. The internal layers are lined with polycrystalline due to its ability as a thermal insulator. This temperature is far too extreme for the worker cells to survive in, and the energy to power it is generated by the digestive system. Similar to how Eridians have 5 limbs and 5 aural components, they also have 5 hearts, each of them being located at the primary ball and socket joint of the limbs. This allows for vertical pumping of the blood, and the pressure is high enough for the blood to be circulated across the thorax. Due to Arid's high gravity, the heart has to do some heavy lifting, making its task harder than that of the human heart. How Rocky sees without eyes. His echolocation world. As established, Eridians don't have eyes, and as such, don't possess sight. But their carapace has auricles that allow piezoelectric flashes. These flashes lead into the fiber optic nervous system, which allows Eridians to possess insanely accurate hearing. This is how we got this super funny scene where Grace is talking on camera in a separate room trying to avoid Rocky, while Rocky can hear everything and keeps interjecting innocently. The auricles across the carapace also have varying frequency sensitivities, allowing Eridians to perceive infrasound and ultrasound, and more. Ambient noise is perceived by the Eridian brain, allowing them to project a mental image of a 3-dimensional environment. This is why the movie displayed shots where Rocky is seen perceiving his environment, including Grace, as blobby black and white shapes. On the off chance that there is no ambient noise, Eridians will tap the ground to make some. Overall, how an Eridian navigates the world is based on this ability. The way sound interacts with the environment is how Rocky perceives their surroundings, where they should go, where there's an obstacle, and so on. This is also why Rocky could not tolerate how messy Grace was, making it difficult for Rocky to navigate the Hail Mary. Good thing Rocky didn't have to see the mess too. A key difference between humans and Eridians lies in the scene where Grace walks through the xenonite tunnel created by Rocky. Various types of xenonite were used because Rocky wanted to give Grace a variety of options to test which material the latter could see through the best. Kinda, as Rocky assumed Grace would use echolocation, much like Eridians. Well, it wasn't a bad idea after all, as the transparent xenonite did prove to work, since Grace could actually see Rocky through it. But because Rocky is from a planet that receives little to no light, the entire tunnel is mostly very dimly lit, with the light coming from the nearby star. Had the star not been present, there would have been no light in the tunnel due to the lack of need for it from the point of view of the echolocation-focused Eridians. Sleep, repair, and how Rocky literally shuts down. Eridian sleeping habits are kind of like a maintenance mode where everything temporarily shuts down. They cannot suddenly wake up like humans do. They cannot be alerted to outside disturbances while remaining asleep. If a thief breaks in, they break in. Nobody's getting up. They deal with this situation by operating in a manner similar to canines or even early humans. If you've ever had a dog, you've probably noticed how they exhibited pack-like behavior with you since they believe you're a part of their pack. So when you go to the washroom for longer durations, be it to shower or whatever, you might find your dog right outside keeping guard. This is because dogs believe that during such sensitive activities, their pack members are at their most vulnerable. And I mean, that is technically true, even if the door is locked. Eridians are the same, as one Eridian always remains awake to watch over the others as they sleep, protecting them and keeping them safe. We see this early in Grace and Rocky's relationship, as Rocky wanted Grace to stay back in the tunnel since they had lost their other crew members and blamed being asleep for that. So, when Grace fell asleep, Rocky watched him. Later, when Rocky was injured, Grace returned the favor to give his alien friend company, as Rocky had literally been injured trying to save Grace from dying, forcing Rocky to come outside its self-created xenonite habitat and into the Hail Mary's Earth-like atmosphere. Eridian sleep comes at irregular intervals as well, precisely because their nigh-unconscious state of dormancy requires them to sleep in shifts. The purpose of such a state is to allow the brain to mostly deal with life support operations. As such, Eridians do not dream. This state also reduces the temperature within the HCS, allowing the worker cells to enter the vessels and do necessary repairs and maintenance. The hearts stop as well, and the worker cells return to the colony to conserve energy. The only ones still at work are those who serve the brain, or the queen bee. This also creates a dichotomy between humans and Eridians, where humans need rest to heal, while Eridians don't heal at all while at rest due to the lack of blood flow. Instead, Eridians need exercise to move the blood around faster. On the off chance that the HCS acquires a severe injury while an Eridian is awake, they will immediately go into shock and become unconscious, allowing the temperature of the HCS to drop to 210 degrees Celsius, flooding the worker cells. What would happen if Rocky were exposed to Earth-like conditions? Rocky has evolved to walk on a terrain where the gravity is twice that of Earth. On Earth, they would experience a disorienting physical shift and feel much lighter. Think Rock Lee without the weights on his legs. They would run faster, leap farther, and be more athletic. They would be much more durable due to their rock and metal-like anatomy, which has evolved to resist a stronger gravitational pull. They would also be stronger as their anatomy is built to operate in more difficult gravity. If you've watched Dragon Ball Z, remember how the Saiyans would train on terrain where the gravity was much higher to strengthen themselves for tougher battles? It's kind of like that, but this wouldn't be without disadvantages either. Eridians would lose their precision and probably throw themselves farther than necessary, at least until they mastered the terrain. Even that wouldn't be enough, as the Eridian blood pressure would become dangerously high and cause health complications. Keep in mind though, this comparison so far is based only on gravity. There are other factors, such as lower atmospheric pressure, lower magnetic fields, and more. For starters, Earth's temperature would straight up kill Eridians. An average 15 to 35 degrees Celsius temperature would cause their blood to cool rapidly and risk a multi-organ failure, since the Eridian body needs a base temperature of 210. Rocky has also evolved to breathe through the ammonia-based air, which is toxic to humans. They wouldn't be able to deal with the nitrogen-dominant atmosphere of Earth. Light penetration would be useless, and the clutter of Earth would be disorienting. Also, we doubt Eridians would fare well with the traffic of Earth cities. After all, Rocky might be alien to us, but we are alien to them as well. Earth's far lower magnetic field would make navigation a hurdle for the Eridians as well, as they rely on that field for moving around, which is exactly why they never need a compass. This would feel like the loss of a sixth sense, as Rocky's internal compass would begin to fail on Earth. After all, Eridians aren't meant for a visual world. The lesser magnetic field would also expose Eridians to higher radiation that's so rare, if not completely absent on Arid, that Eridians are not even aware of what radiation is. Exposure to the same while having an anatomy very sensitive to chemical change would kill Rocky, as they wouldn't be able to survive the mutations or cellular damage, much like Rocky's crewmates. Overall, Earth would feel like a low-pressure vacuum instead of a sustainable environment for the Eridians. As such, the advantages of low gravity would be almost completely negated. For Rocky to survive on Earth, they would need their own habitat, much like how Grace had one on Arid. This could be done by creating a structural suit for Rocky where they would remain encased, which is basically how we've always seen Rocky. Within this suit, the pressure and gravity would be higher, obviously, but that still wouldn't negate the navigational difficulties they'd experience, which would require Grace to build sound reflective surfaces across Rocky's habitat. Once outside, Rocky would first falter and then die due to the difficulty of temperature, pressure, breath, perception, and blood flow. Normally, extraterrestrial creatures are generally presented in an exaggerated humanoid form, something like E.T. or the Predator. Everything about Rocky is so different that it truly cements its position as something very alien. And we love a friendly alien. There's a reason E.T. did so well after all, and it's been a while since we got to enjoy a heartfelt story between a human and an alien. But Project Hail Mary gives us exactly that within a very sci-fi setting, this time with an adult male instead of a child, which somehow makes it even more wholesome. The Eridians are a fascinating species with many things in common with humanity, and we're not gonna lie, we'd love to have an alien best friend like that. That brings us to the end of our video though. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to let us know to make more of this kind of stuff. It really helps us out a lot. Until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a fantastic day.